Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt-Santy. This is our 300th episode, so I have a bunch of the nerds back with me today. Yay. Richard Cohen is on. He's just waving. He forgot that he Mike Huber.
Oh.
Liz Nolasco.
Hi.
And her cat. And Carol Garboden Murray.
Hi, everyone.
Yay. I've done so many interviews with other people for the summer for the podcast that I don't feel like we've had just a bunch of us nerds recording together for a long time. And I love it. So our tradition, I guess, now is we did it for the 200th episode, and now we're doing it for the 300th as we're recording in our pajamas, which for those of you listening to the audio version, you're just going to have to trust the pajama party vibe. But when you see the video version, you'll see Richard and Liz have very decorative jammies. Mike and I have just regular jammies. Carol had another meeting, so she has to be in her grown-up clothes. We're going to talk about school readiness. All right, so the quote is from Learning Together with Young Children by Deb Curtis and Margie Carter, right from the very first paragraph of the introduction. But they wrote, "Do schools and early childhood programs primarily exist to produce compliant workers for economic function, or is the goal to help children grow into their full potential as informed, engaged citizens eager to make a contribution to their communities?" So we've had this topic for a while, but we spent about a half an hour before I hit record trying to find just the right quote because I didn't have that ready to go. And so Richard suggested that we look for something that talks about kind of the factory model of education and the idea that school is based on preparing children for work in factories, if we're looking at the historical roots of our current school system or school processes. And that's so I think this is a good quote. But the other thing I'll say before I open it is I've been thinking a lot lately about how we're not really focused on getting children ready to learn. We use that word, but it's not about their learning. It's more about their performance. And like we're teaching them to be school students, not to be learners. And I think that's a distinction. We use the right words. We say ready to learn, but what we really mean sometimes is ready to receive information or ready to passively participate. So anyway, let's be grouchy about school readiness for a while, and then we can talk about what to do instead. We can do a little bit of is there any hope kind of conversation at the end. But let's start with why this is a topic that we all want to talk about.
When you said performance,
yeah,
that really made me think about the adult view of children. And I've been thinking a lot about how adults feel good when they hear kids memorize the days of the week, or when they hear kids use big words, or when they're surprised by this content. The children know all these facts about dinosaurs. You know, it's like there's a performance element, and then I think it crosses over into a measurement and seeing what school looks like. And then I think it crosses over into marketing. So I think in our country, it's so complicated, right? Because so many families are paying for quality care and education. And now we have this UPK movement that's rising, which is potentially a wonderful thing for our country. But what is early education? What is preschool in this context of who is the child and what does the adult expect and what is school? And then this whole consumerism marketing. So the child is a performer or the child is a participant, right? And being a participant in learning can look so messy, it can look so confusing, it can look so beautiful, but it doesn't always have that element of neatness, like, oh, wow, he learned his days of the week, you know? So I think that's a very complicated answer, but that kind of, that word performance got me going in that direction.
Well, and that word performance to me, sorry, Mike, implies product rather than
Right.
process. So everyone, including the parents who just want to make sure that their children are getting the best education they're spending their hard-earned dollars on, right? They judge quality by watching their kids' performances. What does my child appear to know? That must mean that they're getting, they're having the right early childhood experience. So I agree with you, Carol. That word performance to me is troubling.
And I was going to bring up just that idea that I understand the thinking of schooling as, preparing children for factory work. There's a historical reason for that. But I also think that Carol's use of the word consumer really hits it. I think we're really raising kids to be consumers. And, you're a passive consumer. You're not a creator. You're a consumer. At least because you can test that.
Yeah.
So, Mike, say more about how school children are consumers.
Well, I think it comes down to teachers have the knowledge, they give it to us. So our job, when we're students, or I guess I should say, when the children are students, their job is to do what the teacher says, to follow what the teacher says, which also fits into that factory work model too. But I think more so right now, it's more about, and here's the product. And if we can only find the right curriculum to purchase, then the kids will learn more, so it, so I think in some ways it hits at some things that the factory model idea doesn't. That just more about how it ends up becoming big business, and it's up to states, and the universal pre-K really gets into it, because to make it efficient enough, we have to find those bigger companies that are going to have the right product to then give the teachers, so then they can give it to the kids. And there's not this idea that people are creators, or that we're creating something in the classroom itself. So that's what.
Yeah.
And societally, we have such a short view of what school is for, right? School is for life success. School is for making money later, which returns back to that capitalist viewpoint. But there isn't this view of, the vast majority of these children are going to our schools that are set to these standards and these frameworks and models of teaching. And what kind of citizens do we want in the world, and how can we empower these kids to become citizens and to be citizens, versus, as you've all said, sitting and absorbing information and maybe hopefully learning how to analyze it, but more than likely just learning how to spit it back out.
Yeah. So Tiffany joined while we were in the middle of that, and I feel like, Tiffany, you came in at just the right time to jump on.
We're talking about capitalism.
We're talking about capitalism. You came in at
party.
just the right time. So we're talking about
Like mention capitalism yet.
she appears like a magic genie.
My ears perk up.
But we're talking about the factory model kind of education, and how that factors into school readiness, and school readiness becoming kind of a marketing phrase, sort of. I just recorded with I'm going to try and make this relevant, but really I just want to talk about this part that I recorded with William Doyle and Posse Solberg last week, authors of Let the Children Play. And I just like to say that. But anyway, one of the things they did talk about was how the phrase 21st century skills has sort of not taken over school readiness as the catchphrase, but kind of joined the school readiness movement. And it's essentially also just sort of a marketing phrase for commodifying readiness and commodifying children and making products that people can sell, rather than really thinking about what Deb and Margie said in the quote, helping children grow to their full potential as informed, engaged citizens eager to make a contribution to their communities.
Yeah, I have an example of that. Recently in our town, we're having the AmeriCorps, which is, again, a very well-intentioned organization. They're training volunteers who get a stipend to come into early childhood settings. And, so I did have an encounter with them, and they want to come into our school, but the package is, again, how are we going to prove that we are making a difference, and how is it going to be measurable?
Mm-hmm.
So I can't remember, I think it was like infused tutoring is what they called it.
Oh,
So they're
wow.
training these people in math, pre-literacy and pre-math, those two areas, math and literacy. And it's this infused tutoring model. And they come into your center for maybe 10 to 20 hours a week. And on top of, not part as the ratio, but on top of what you're already doing in your school, in your childcare center, they are implementing these what they call play-based lessons. They are linked to research that shows evidence that these children who get this, their 4th year of life, are going to have these skills when they enter kindergarten. And I have no doubt that that's true, right? I have no doubt that those kids who get that infused tutoring then can say, yes, that's an A, that's not a T, that's an A. So they're going to get some skills that help them take that first step into kindergarten. And it's just such an interesting conversation, because in my dialogue with them, I said, so are your infused tutors able to adapt a little bit to our way of seeing play and care as the primary pedagogy, and looking more at the processes and the underlying, learning impulses that are natural to children? And they were like, no, not, we really need to stick to
We need fidelity.
We need fidelity. So that was the conversation. And certainly, again, they're linked to Harvard, they're linked to, all sorts of poverty movements that, are so good in terms of really changing the culture of schools and giving children more opportunities. So it's just that interesting conversation about measurement. And also it's again, I think of Del, is it Farah?
Yeah.
I think of her research. Yes, it's true. Those children will be able to recite their ABCs. And then that there is like a 6-month period that will, they will show some evidence of growth. And then what she was seeing in her studies, that by 3rd grade, everyone had kind of equalized, and those children who had perhaps a lot of training when they were 3 and 4 were actually doing worse than their peers. And she was linking it to sort of a burnout or a feeling of being corrected and being in a sort of rote model of education that wasn't inspiring children to really love school. So there's that conversation as well.
Yeah.
And
we
the
could
classism,
Liz.
the classism and white savior complex that are just inherent in many of the words that you just used, right? These targeted programs towards children in poverty.
Yeah.
We're going to make sure that, we bring them into the hegemony immediately. And we're going to, take away those differences because it doesn't serve the greater narrative of saving them.
Yeah. That was one thing that that I read. So when I was trying to figure out the quote, I was looking through this book last night called Rethinking School Readiness. That's a collection of essays that I was just looking at what I had highlighted to see what we should use for today, and we used none of them. But one thing that that was oh no, I've lost it. Liz, what were you just talking about? Oh, poverty. One of the authors, one of the writers did say, if our concern is that these children who are in poverty are not, doing as well in school, whatever that means, then why isn't there just kind of communal agreement that then we should be looking at poverty? No, we think, nope, we need to work these 3, 4, and 5-year-olds harder because they live in poverty, and poverty doesn't do as well in school, instead of just saying, oh, okay, so what could we do to solve that root issue with maybe some grown-ups taking more of the responsibility instead of loading it onto the shoulders of children who are 36 to 60 months old.
Well, and who decided that reading and math should be the greatest focus for these early years? Why are we already tracking them towards their SAT scores at age 3 and 4? When we talk about school readiness, what does school even mean?
Mhm.
And so how does that then translate into what are we doing to get them ready for it? It just doesn't make any sense. You know, in the work that I did in neighborhoods of poverty in early childhood, the focus was heavily on early intervention programs around reading and math. And what was completely lost there was any kind of executive function sort of work, any kind of play, any kind of social, emotional skill development. And while those kids, like Carol said, may have tested better, which was the goal for those reading and math skills, they couldn't function in a community environment because there was no effort put into those critical parts that we six know are the most important parts in early childhood work.
Mhm. You gonna jump in, Tiff? I feel like this is where you should jump in.
I know I have a toddler trying to steal the phone in the background. This is so to me, everything that's happening relates back to that Elliot Haskell conversation about how we only view early childhood education through its economic impact. And like, yeah, thanks, capitalism. But what I was frantically trying to do in the sidelines was that the NIEER, National Institute of Early Education Research newsletter, had an article yesterday that they sent out in their weekly newsletter that said, oh, guess what? The relationship with teachers is more important when talking about ACEs and like uplifting children through education. And it's like the research is there. Why do we keep not listening to it?
Yeah.
Why do we keep just like, oh, I'll just keep scrolling through that. That one wasn't important. But the end of it says, like, the study recommends a constructivist, social-based, relationship-based model for education. And every child that went through that program was happier and more like mitigated their ACEs score long-term through the rest of their life. Like, we're trying to help their lives be great lives. And that should be the focus of every conversation when we're talking about children.
Yeah.
And
Rand.
patriarchy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was pausing because I thought surely either Mike or Richard was going to jump in there. But so I think part of the problem is we have this model, which is the factory model in not even just we're preparing them for factory work, but just that this is how learning must happen. It's a conveyor belt kind of thing. What do you call that? Assembly line, where at each stage we just give them this, and so that they always will be ready for the next thing. And we think we can prepackage that. We think we can guess what that needs to be, what those pieces of machinery that we add at each point need to be. And so when research comes up, like about relationships or about social emotional, or research that's been out there that suddenly resurfaces, instead of saying, oh, we should relook at the whole system with this lens, we think, oh, how can we make a piece of machinery about social emotional learning that we can plug in when they come to our point of the assembly line? And then it doesn't fit because it's not that measurable performative thing that numbers, letters, shapes, and colors are.
Right. I think the conveyor belt in this case is usually a checklist of some sort.
Yeah.
Right. There's
standards.
Skills or standards, and okay, this is what we need the 12-month-old to do, or this. And whenever you like read biographies or hear stories of people who are really successful, it's usually they didn't do well in school until this one thing happened and it sparked them. And it's like, why aren't we talking about the sparks? Which I guess you and I recorded, Heather, with Kisa Marx, and there was that term genius was the one used, and now I forgot the author that came from. But that idea of what's the thing that sparks the child?
Something. Yeah.
And that's gonna be success, not, well, you didn't do all the things on the checklist.
Right.
Therefore, we can't have you go on to the next thing. We have to keep working on the thing that you don't like time with, not around your sense of competence, not around your executive function skills, but we're just going to do the thing on the checklist.
Yeah.
It like makes you look at the things the child's not doing.
Yeah. Two toddlers on the show now. Wow. So I think so that that makes me think about the early learning standards that every state has to have now. And I don't know of any that were developed thinking, what do we know developmentally speaking typically about infants, 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, and how can we best support that? We looked at what do we want them to do when they're 18, and let's work backwards from that.
That's right.
And that's I think a really harmful way to approach working with young children, any child really. I was recently in a meeting where they were talking about, I work in a college now, so I'm in lots of these meetings where we're talking about we need more college students. And so now the conversation is, well, if we can hook them at 13, we can get them to come straight, to college when they graduate. And I was like, we're pushing them from both ends now. Like they can't have this part of childhood because they've got to be ready for the school system and kindergarten or first grade or whenever they go in. And they can't have this end part of childhood because they've got to be figuring out what they want to do with the rest of their lives, and get college figured out. And it hurt. I mean, of course it annoys me and I get angry, but it hurts my heart that adults who have chosen to work with young children have such a hard time seeing childhood. And
if we're going to talk about the other end, because we're saying school readiness and because our field focuses on school readiness, the other end is 12th grade. But having, volunteered a lot in nursing homes, nobody has said, do you know what? I actually finished some of the 3rd grade standards in 1st grade. And that's my memory of my life. That's the thing.
Right. Yeah.
And honestly, it sounds like I'm changing subjects, but it's like, if we're not preparing people to have a good life, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to that conveyor belt and assembly line, right? So if we're saying the definition of school, basically we're admitting to it. We as a society are saying school is an assembly line. And so school readiness is putting them on that assembly line sooner.
Mm-hmm.
So they can be prepared for the quote unquote start of the assembly line in kindergarten.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is to just get them there sooner. And that's just so sad and so disturbing.
Yeah.
Because as you said, it's all about focusing on the future, and early childhood is all about focusing on the present. And we can't do that as long as we're burdened by these worries and concerns about the future.
Yeah. So maybe this is a good place to shift the conversation towards what we can be doing, what we should be doing. But whenever I talk about readiness, or I had a student last year who was she worked for Head Start, and she was talking about how their work with the parents was even getting parents school ready. So like their attendance policies for 3-year-olds were geared towards making sure parents knew how to get their kids to school on time down the road. So it's not even just children, but it always makes me think of something that I heard Lisa Murphy, for those of you who don't know who one name Lisa is, Lisa said long time ago, I heard her say, if we knew a famine was coming, we would not start starving children now so that they're ready for hunger. We would give them everything we knew. If we thought there was going to be a food shortage, on a broad scale, we would be doing everything we should. I would hope we would be doing everything we could be to make sure that they're healthy and fed and prepared for that now, which is a different preparation than what we're talking about when we think, well, they've got to learn to sit still and obey eventually. So I'm going to be a little harder on them now when they're 3 so that they're ready to do that when they're 5 or 6.
We had that same conversation here at my school yesterday. We were fortunate to have Julia Kambasa here. She was talking to our educators about learning stories and showing video of just like such rich, deep play and talking about the teacher's role. And that came up. It comes up all the time, right? Like, well, if my kid's going to kindergarten, like they're going to get their spirit crushed in public school. So if we're going to have this freedom and we're going to be celebrating their movement, and then they're going to be told that wiggling is bad, like, is this okay? Are we, what is our role for preparing them? I don't want my kid to be crushed. And Julia brought that same thing up. Like, okay, you know, what is early childhood and what is our purpose? And are we going to, exactly what you said, start depriving children to prepare them for something that is to come? And
Yeah.
what popped into my mind was this story of my own child having a rich play-based early childhood experience and going to public school. And I remember one of the first conversations that he had with me was, he said, Mom, the teacher gave everyone a token for coming back to their desk and sitting down quietly after we walked in the line. But she missed Justin.
Mm.
And I thought, wow, I am so happy my kid is someone who had an early childhood experience that was very different than this, because we didn't treat children that way in his early childhood setting. He learned about fairness and justice and kindness, and he didn't learn about ranking kids.
Yeah.
And at bedtime, he had to say, I'm worried about Justin.
Yeah.
I'm worried about Justin. I thought, so he's a thinker, he's a carer, and all kids are. All kids are. But now I feel like, okay, he was prepared to be a thinker.
Yeah.
He was prepared to question the system on the first day of kindergarten. And I think that's what we want to do, right? And for the parents, in terms of getting parents ready for kindergarten, we can tell them our stories. We can say, hey, you know what? When my kindergarten teacher sent home the homework, I very kindly said to her, we're not going to do homework in our house. We're going to make dinner together, and then we're going to hang out in the backyard. And you know what she said to me? She said, wow, thank you for letting me know that. And we had a whole discussion with the school about it.
Yeah.
She said, I thought parents wanted homework in kindergarten.
Wow.
So, you know, we can advocate, we can help our parents see that there's a new way to be ready for kindergarten. And it's helping our children be thinkers. And there are some really great, wonderful educators who are also feeling this resistance and want to have this dialogue with us. So kindergarten readiness, maybe we can think about it in a different way, you said, in a hopeful way.
Yeah.
Maybe we can celebrate children as thinkers.
Yeah.
Well, the way I've always said it is, thank you, Carol. You summed it all up so perfectly.
Yeah. We all just nod and listen to Carol.
Yeah. I mean, it was perfect.
Yeah.
Because what I've always said, and I've said it before on this show, is that in addition to caring and love and kindness and respect and all those things that are inherent parts of early childhood experience, should be, we need to help children solve problems. We need to give them lots and lots of problems to solve, conflicts to resolve. And what we tend to do in the society is to avoid those things. We don't like people, and the subset of people, young children, to have problems and to face challenges. But in early childhood education, we need to give them lots of problems to solve. We think the logic is, well, if they're going to encounter worksheets, we need to give them worksheets now.
Yeah.
And if they're going to encounter pressure to read, we need to get them started reading now. But in fact, if we just give them lots of problems to solve, then when they get to elementary school, learning how to do a required worksheet is just another problem to be solved. Learning how to sit for a long time in a desk because you have to. The answer isn't to sit them at desks earlier. The answer is to give them problems to solve so that when the problem of sitting at a desk comes, they can figure out how to navigate that moment.
Yeah. And so I want to assume that when you don't mean we should make their life difficult when you say we should give them problems to solve. Like,
no,
we should,
let me say it a different way.
Yeah.
We should let them play.
Yeah.
You just let them play, and opportunities for solving problems will abound.
And interact with each other. And yeah.
I'd like to jump in as I clean the markers that Judy so kindly put away in the cup of milk. So tidy.
She's a good helper.
Yeah. Thank you, Judy. That I think another thing we can be doing is advocating for the idea that school is childcare.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
When kids go to school, they are being cared for in a place by individuals. Would you, like, if it was just kids that like here's the person that you're going to care for in my home all day, and they don't let you go to the bathroom, and they make you do worksheets all day, and they yell at you when you don't want to do this very direct instruction listening sitting activity, like you would fire that nanny. And so like why do we have this expectation that just because it's school it must be good, and not that fundamental that if the care isn't good, then who gives a crap what our educational experience is like?
Mhm. But I think there are folks who would appreciate that about their nanny, because we've been programmed to think that every moment
Yes.
should be educational, and that's what education looks like to so many of us if we've never been offered another way of thinking about it. Mike's got his hand up. He's ready to go.
And I think the paradigm shift that is needed is that even 12th graders or whatever, high school students, it's about care. Otherwise, the pandemic would have produced the best students ever, even when we use the measurements we're already using. And it's opposite, because the caring that happens, that teachers, like good teachers at any level, know that's part of the job. But it's not the thing that they talk about in education, right? It's like, oh, you're not helping the student figure out what they're going to do with the rest of their life, even though lots of people talk about the reason I'm in this career is I had this, teacher in 9th grade that whatever, and so when we ignore the caring elements of all education, I think we run into that problem of, because we could easily say, that's the thing that drove me nuts of like, how did we get through the pandemic, and people talking about how hard it was for students at every level, and then say, but what we need is more academics because they fell behind in academics.
Yeah.
It's like, but they fell behind in academics because we weren't caring. They weren't focused on social emotional issues. They weren't dealing with the problem solving. I mean, middle school and high school is all about problem solving social emotional issues. And then there's classes that you go to in between. And like we ignore that part.
Yeah.
Every level. So
yeah.
But and then when it is brought up in the upper grades, it's as a problem solving tool for those kids.
Yes.
Right. You build relationships with those kids so they don't act out, and so you can really teach them. It's seen as the way to, it's seen as a Band-Aid measure, right? You build the relationships and then they'll care about your coursework.
Right. It's still relationships and social emotional considerations become commodified and performative and tools after the fact for that kind of compliance and control that we're starting to focus on so early.
And I think like, there's two like the binary, right?
Yeah.
It's like care and love is soft, and this other stuff is hard.
Yeah.
And how do we say, hey, care and love is the hard stuff? Like yesterday when I was with my educators writing learning stories, this is the hard stuff. A checklist is actually pretty easy. You can figure that out, but this is the hard stuff.
Yeah.
It's the subtleties, it's the thinking, it's the empathy, it's the solving problems, like Richard said.
Yeah.
It's considering other perspectives, like care and love and play is the hard stuff. It's the rigor, it's the real life, it's the foundation of all the thinking and motivation, and like you guys talked about, the brilliance and the genius of humans. So like this idea that it's soft and, oh, we're being so gentle, and then they're going to go to public school and they're going to have such a hard time hitting that real world. It's like we have to really cut through that. I guess that's patriarchy, right? Because care and love are women, typically
lady
gendered.
Yeah. So we've got problem solving, we've got care and love and relationships as things we should be thinking about that are school readiness. If we really need to define things in terms of whether it's getting them ready for school or not, those things all do contribute to sending a child into this new system that they're going to have to, face and be part of and navigate. What else should we be doing instead of focusing on the assembly line?
Well, I want to reiterate something Tiffany just said, which was revolutionary and needs to be said again and louder.
That's our girl.
School is childcare,
Yeah.
right?
You know who I was quoting though? That's a Carol line.
Well, there you go. Perfect. Because, you know, I spend so much time, not so much, but I spend time disagreeing with people or trying to help them understand this very concept.
Mhm.
And they will say, I am not a caregiver. I am a preschool teacher.
Yeah.
And that's why I get paid more money, because I know how to write lesson plans with student outcomes and, you know, ensure that they're meeting their outcomes and all those things. And so teachers are far more important than caregivers. And so there's a piece of patriarchy woven into the system that has us grown-ups thinking, having our values skewed in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
So part of the answer is changing the systems that the grown-ups are in that care for young children.
Yeah. And I think this is maybe a good part to say, we're not sitting here saying that people who work in public schools are terrible, evil people intentionally harming children. We're talking about the system that we're all part of, right? And every profession has the wonderful and the not so wonderful and the whole in between. So I don't want people to be like, oh, they just spent an hour bashing kindergarten teachers or whatever. But the system creates these roles and these views and this lens that gets in the way of doing what's really supportive and healthy.
And it's that big disconnect between, you know, if you know better, do better. Well, our research knows better, but our praxis has not caught up in decades. Why not?
Yeah.
It's that hyper individualism again, though. You know, parents have children and want that child to be the best child. And so we need to get this into them early so they're ready for school and so they can succeed at life. And we're seeing this increased, inequality. I don't know why that word was so hard to access. Increased inequality. And we're saying, wait, I need my child to keep up my standard of living, or I need my child to get ahead of where we are. And all of my hopes and dreams are going to be pinned vicariously on this child. And therefore all of it needs to get in early. And so we can't have these broader ideas of what education is for, how we support and build these grown-ups who are going to change things and do things well without supporting and caring for their families and making their situations less precarious. Which I guess is even a little bit bigger than changing the whole school systems, but it all kind of goes together, right?
But I think the six of us can do it.
Conversations.
Well, Richard said we should give problems for the children to solve, and we could just say, okay, this week we're solving patriarchy. Go.
There you go. P is for patriarchy.
But we'll make it a song, and we'll have a story and
finger plays.
Yes, that was I was forgetting what those were. It's, I mean, of course it's a big, huge systemic problem, but that doesn't mean that. So this week I almost emailed you all and said, let's not do school readiness, because this week for some reason I've been feeling less hopeful about the work than I usually do. Like it's always like, you know, there's always barriers and the systems are big, and but I always usually feel like, but if, you know, that small group of committed, determined people, whatever the Margaret Mead quote is, can stick with it and make the difference, then we'll do it. But this week I really was like, why am I even still talking about these things with people? So I guess where I'm going with that is that I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about the power we each have wherever we are, to sort of push back against the system.
I would say that I get so much strength from you, all you modern people out there that are seeing children. But I also think about John Dewey, and I also think about Vivian Gussen-Paley, and I also think about, you know, the people who were not popular 100 years ago, right? So we're not alone. We're not alone. And it is a slow, and maybe the pendulum swings, and our life, this period of our life we just continue to see, like Tiffany said, we know better and we're not doing better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have a little blip here, but we do have each other. We do have a really large group of committed educators across the nation and across the world who really see children. And we do have this history
Mm-hmm.
of people who weren't popular 100 and we can go back, right? We can go back to Froebel. We can say there have always been people who said play, children, agency, choice, the things that we're talking about.
Mommy.
And the only other thing that comes to my mind is was it Kisa Marx?
Mm-hmm.
In that last talk, she said, why is this renegade?
Yeah.
Why is this revolutionary? This is loving children. This needs to be normalized, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can see I slip up and down that continuum.
Yeah.
Like, I'm alone, I'm doing this, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. And then on the other hand, wow, there's so much support.
Yeah.
So much movement, but it does feel countercultural at times, and that can wear you down.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Carol.
And I
Sorry,
think
I had to disappear. The dog took off barking down the driveway.
Oh, okay. Go ahead,
But
Mike.
I think, yeah, I have more things to say after
Okay.
Mike. Go, Mike, go.
Okay. Yeah, Mike's turn, then Tiffany.
I was probably has a good answer. If nothing else, thinking about me, Liz, and Tiffany are the ones who, and Carol, I guess, we work directly with children on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that is, what do we do for the kids who are at least with us, even if, I mean, we can also do work to try to change the system, but even in our own, environments, what do we do? That's what I'm kind of interested in.
That's good. Yeah.
So
That's what I was going to say. Good one, Mike.
Yeah, Tiffany.
I think that radically performing that different education model that we want to see. So much of this, like, narrow-minded, that's not a nice way to say that, but the
narrow definitions,
narrow definitions of what education should be is simply because they, like, if you've never seen anything different or lived anything different, why would you even want to do something different?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that making those places for childhood that are all of the things that we say school should be, so that people have a model to look to and say, look, it's working.
Mm-hmm.
And it's working really well.
Mm-hmm.
And you can take your longitudinal measured studies and do them here, and it should get even better results with this radically different method and model.
That is not how I thought a sentence that started with, you can take these longitudinal studies was going to end. Your ending was better.
Longitudinal is the key, because most research they do is, how do kids do in kindergarten, maybe first grade? And every time it goes a little farther, Del Ferran is a great example, the same thing keeps coming up, because you can test anything you want. You can teach kids whatever, the US women's soccer, team, all of their names and all that, and they can recite them the way they recite dinosaurs. And if that's what we were testing on, we could say, look at that, it worked.
Yeah.
But what does that do for them in their life, or even the next 5 years, let alone the next 65 years, 75 years? Like, longitudinal studies are the only way to actually measure things. And yet, and that's if you're going to measure, and rather than doing the backwards thing of, this is what we want in 12th grade,
right,
and then just back it up, and we'll just break it down into steps, the scope and sequence idea. I mean, just that phrase, scope and sequence, implies that there is like this one thing that all humans need to do, and they're going to do it in the exact same order. And then for all the people who don't fit that scope and sequence, well, they're the challenging children,
Right.
or the challenge of behaviors, or whatever euphemism you want to use. And it's like, or we could pretend they're humans, figure out what sparks them, have a relationship with them, build off of those things, help them see themselves as someone who cares about others, who learns, who, if they are interested in something, they can do it, they can solve the problems, rather than, nope, but that doesn't fit in the scope.
Mhm.
Sorry, we created the scope. You're only supposed to do this much here. even to the point where I've seen people like a 3-year-old, or a 4-year-old who gets what negative numbers are, even though they don't have the vocabulary.
Uh-huh.
So we're like, well, that's not a thing. Or, they're like,
We don't have that on our checklist.
yeah, it doesn't fit on the checklist. They don't follow, oh, this kid, like, they're interested in something that, most people in early childhood, were scared of math. So they
Mhm.
probably couldn't explain it, but this child's already figuring it out, and why not follow it?
Mhm.
Can't even do the things they're interested in if it doesn't fit a scope.
Right.
I'm still going into the negative there. I was going to talk about, instead,
Yeah, go ahead.
what did they get in things. I'll try to think of a story from last week.
Okay. Someone else
Probably-
talk while Mike thinks of a story.
I'm
I'll talk
thinking of,
about instead.
oh, go ahead.
Okay, well, I was thinking, Heather, when you asked what should a kind of a frontline teacher caregiver do,
Mhm.
rather than this conversation we've been having about big ideas and abstractions. And so my response is, take a deep breath, slow down,
Mhm.
let your mind slow down a little bit so that you can notice the transmission of values, so that you can see that every little thing, every little tiny thing that you do is a value transmitted to someone else's child and to their family. And what you emphasize and don't emphasize, where you put your attention and where you don't, all of those inform the child's growing values and what's important to them.
Mhm.
And if what you want to be important is caring and relationships and kindness and respect and those things, then make sure you're explicitly creating opportunities for those things, moment to moment and day to day.
Mhm.
How you design your daily schedule, how you design your classroom space, all of those things that are in your power, define the young children's experiences who are in your care, and will and I guess the last thing I would say is, it's a massive leap of faith. You have to take a leap of faith.
Mhm. Yeah.
All of those things that I was just rambling about will actually make a difference and will get a child ready for school, quote unquote,
Mhm.
by giving them all those things and not focusing as much time and energy and affect on reading and math. You will prepare them for reading and math.
Mhm. Thanks, Richard.
So I just looked at the pictures. So I've been on vacation, and I'm at a cabin now, hence the lovely backdrop of yet. But just looking at photos of what happened yesterday at my center, and there's these toddlers that were given lids and containers with lids. And then there's just these things of, this child's a music maker. They like put a lid on something, started banging it.
Mhm.
Another child seemed to be shaking things. Another child put a toilet paper tube, like stuck it in there, and then put pencils inside the tube. Another child just tried different lids, was really mostly interested in making the lids match, which, I could use help with in my kitchen.
Right.
I'm just like going through these lists. Another kid just started collecting stuff.
Mhm.
One kid made a hand blaster, whatever that is, and one kid just found a big stick and ignored the containers altogether.
Sweet. Nice.
Just that idea that thinking about what the 6 of us could easily talk about. If you want to talk about school readiness, you
Right.
can. But what about the excitement of that? And you could just even imagine the children talking to each other or showing each other things, or the
Mhm.
excitement of some new discovery. you know, it's that type of spark. And to Richard's point, right, it's like you set up the room, provide space, time, and materials, and then follow the children. Like,
Yeah.
it's not, rather than an agenda.
And I think, you know, I can't remember which one of us touched on teachers needing to feel like teachers. I think, Richard, you were talking about, I'm a teacher, not a caregiver, that kind of dichotomy. And
yeah.
people do wonder, if I'm not focused on these sort of narrow academic performative skills, then how am I a professional? What am I doing with all my expertise? But what you just described, teachers noticed that and valued it enough to share it, and to support it and to allow it. And that's where our professionalism comes in. That's where our role comes in. And we don't have to fight so hard to be seen as, you know, we get worried that what I'm doing doesn't look like the societal vision view of what a teacher does. So maybe that's another one of the, in the moment, right now, things we can do to sort of push back is to recognize that this is me being a professional when I see what's happening here with these containers, lids, and sticks and toilet paper tubes.
And one thing I didn't say, but at our center, we're making a conscious effort this time of having once a month parent sort of, you know, times to get together and hear about what is school readiness.
Yeah.
In this sense, you know, right? And so schema play theory is going to be a part of that. Social and emotional learning is going to be part of that. Executive function skills are going to be part of that. Just helping parents kind of understand, because I understand the like parental anxiety,
right,
that happens, but also, and here's the things that are happening, and think about it. You know, you can usually say, think about something that happened to you at work. Who are the people you wanted to solve it? Or even if you hire people, you get the person lists their things, you know, the things they do, or you have the list of what they need to be able to do. And you often hire the person who doesn't meet every single requirement because there's something there, and it is usually not part of a checklist.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The checklist is why you hire someone.
Yeah.
And most parents can understand those things. And our population tends to have the parents who are hiring, not
yeah.
say currently, but we also work with centers that have the opposite, right? That are much more whatever, more in that working class,
The being hired
being hired versus hiring. But still, like, you can still see that, right? That so yeah, so I think that's part of it too, in our small way, right? We're only dealing with the parents in the programs we're part of. And yet, you know, it's a thing we can do. It's within our control. And we are using the word school readiness for those talks because that's the language that parents are. But then, yeah, I think our catchphrase is school readiness is not a set of skills. It's about children's identity in themselves, thinking of themselves.
Yeah, I think
glad
that's
you brought up. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I think that idea of the child's identity being the biggest contribution we can contribute, or the biggest thing we can contribute to in terms of whether they're quote unquote ready to get to that next stage. I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you're using the language school readiness. I think we need to claim it more. It's sometimes we want to change the language, and I understand why we need to do that, but I think that's smart because there are times we're going to have to say no, you know. So do we have the boldness to say no? And if you're in the classroom, you know, if there's something that just hasn't felt very respectful to children, that you just have that impulse, like maybe it's the calendar that you have to do, maybe it's the tracing the names or something. If you have that impulse to say no, and you can do that because you are a professional with a very solid foundation of this core body of knowledge of child development, then how are you going to say yes? So I like that idea of, like, you're saying no, school readiness is not learning how to write all your upper and lowercase alphabet before you're 5, you're saying this is school readiness. And so I might say, hey, I'm deciding not to do calendar this year. And in my school, we have it in this category of what do we, maybe we're calling it numeracy and math. We're going to make sure kids see those numbers every day or whatever, patterns or something. I'm deciding not to do that. So I'm saying no. And here's what I am doing. Here's what I'm doing. And this is, I care about numeracy too. And look what these kids are doing when they were sorting these rocks and putting them in these containers and whatever that story Mike just told about the lids and the schema and fitting things inside of each other. You know, this is what numeracy looks like for a 3-year-old. The calendar might be something numeracy looks like for middle school when you got to follow your schedule. But right now I'm 3. So I like saying no and then having space and then saying yes and then pulling that language back in, like this is school readiness.
And I think that's something a lot of programs and providers are frightened to do. I think that in a lot of the way we professionally prepare educators and caregivers doesn't give them that language and flexibility. And I think having that flexibility of thinking is really crucial to being able to make that kind of difference and being able to frame it to parents who are then going to go out to their friends who are also parents and say, oh, but I learned this thing, and hey, look at what they're doing on the playground. They're putting all of the wood chips into this one bucket. That's also part of school readiness. And I'm happy that we're sitting here at the playground on Saturday and not drilling numbers or, doing our parent imposed homework because that child is going to be kindergarten ready, and letting them play and letting them find and solve those problems. And I think that's one of the gifts of working with the whole family and not just the child, is that we can impart this knowledge, impart this creativity and flexibility in thinking about how children learn, and cast that wider net even when we don't necessarily work with all of the children who are going to be impacted by these conversations.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing it takes is courage.
Yes.
Everything we've been talking about in this group, we're all on the same page. So we're all nodding and agreeing with each other. And, yeah, you go and all that. But this isn't how the rest of the world operates. And so what we've been talking about here is countercultural. It's rebellious. And so if you're going to do what we're talking about, just the simplest things like I'm going to look at my space and I'm going to look at my daily schedule. And I'm going to think about the way I interact with young children for the purpose of giving them more love and caring and kindness and all those things. That's countercultural. And just know that you're going to be walking against a very strong wind or a salmon swimming upstream, and you need to be prepared for that. And so part of what Mike talked about was parent education. So if you're going to take on this way of doing early childhood, you have to know that part of being a professional is educating the parents and even educating your boss sometimes about why you're making the choices you make. And that's unfortunately part of this work.
Right. Say your thing, Mike. You put it in the chat box. That doesn't help for a podcast.
Because anyways, so and this isn't my quote, but we're not, so for all of those people listening, we're not preaching to the choir, we're giving you ammunition. It's that idea that to be courageous, you need your own groups, whether it's on social media, podcasts, other friends you have in your own town that you can, get together once in a while, have coffee or whatever it is. But you need to be able to, it's exhausting if you feel like you're the only one. I think Carol was the one who said that earlier. And I think things like this and other things that are around help you figure out, or, at least, the first thing I do when something comes up is I will usually message Heather. Sometimes a group chat.
The whole group,
but it is that thing, but it helps me get through, like, oh man, this thing, or I'm about to talk to someone. What should I say?
Yeah.
It helps because in the moment, it does sometimes feel like you're the only one, but clearly you're not.
Yeah. Which is why I need you all to move to Indiana, please. And thank you. There are a couple houses open in my neighborhood.
The other state.
I'm going to raise my hand in the background here. We still need to talk about capitalism again, though, because how many educators don't have time and don't have money
Yeah.
to do any of this.
Yeah.
It's true.
So we've
Because
been talking
our
for just about an
Field
hour.
isn't valued.
That's gonna have to be a whole other episode. But seriously, I don't want to like just be like, shut up, Tiffany. But my laptop battery is about to
We
die.
talked about it before.
And we're just a little bit more than an hour, so I'm writing it down. And that'll be a next step. This is a fascinating pod while I'm writing my note. And everybody else is just afraid to speak now because I'm
You can
gonna
hear
tell
the
them to shut
pen
up.
scratching.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel like this was a lot, and we could just keep going. Like there's usually, even at the end of an hour, there's like okay, this is really wrapping up, but we don't have that. We're not wrapping up, so I guess I'll just have to impose that and say this was a good
Wait, I've got one last thing to say.
Okay, all right,
Before you say
go.
it. Happy 300th episode,
Oh.
That Early Childhood Nerd.
Thank you. Well, it's all of
Yay,
us, right?
300.
So, there wouldn't be 300 without you all, because it wouldn't be the same podcast if it was just me talking, that's for sure. So thank you all for being part of the Nerd Collective or Coven, whichever group you're in on Facebook. Thank you all for being part of it, and I really I mean that. I'm so glad that we get to do these kinds of things together. And for everybody who's listening, obviously there wouldn't be a 300th episode without people who are listening to it. So thank you all so much for this. I hope that we can just keep going. All right, with that, thank you everybody for being here, for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd, and hope you'll come back again for another episode next week.